right, I think we'll go ahead and start. We're at 1:32. I don't want to start too late, and certainly want to get through our important presentations, including one about Clatsop County, I hear. As word on the street is it'll be quite stimulating. So, welcome to those of you who are here and those of you who are online. Thank you for being here. This is the Clatsop County Coordinated Housing Task Force Committee. I don't know what other acronym we could come up with, but we have been meeting for quite a while now. We are a public group that is going to help Clatsop County work on a major planning project, and Alyssa can probably talk a little bit more about that and update us on that. But we've also been trying to learn about different housing efforts that are underway within the county. Some of them are in construction mode, some of them are in planning mode, and some of them are way back in code mode. And so we're going to learn about a couple of those things today. Let's start with introductions. Alyssa, would you introduce yourself? Tell us where you're from.
Hi everyone, Alyssa Gertler. I work for Clatsop County as the housing manager, and I'm sorry I can't be there in person with you today, but sorry, not sorry.
All right, Garrett.
Hey, I'm Garrett Phillips with the Columbia River Estuary Study Task Force.
And Garrett's organization is helping us to promote the community participation and helping us facilitate the grant project as well. Jared.
Jared Karnofsky, I'm the Vice President of Ancillary and Support Services at Columbia Memorial Hospital.
Say hello to my lovely wife when you get a chance.
Will do.
All right. Brett, we're doing introductions, and where are you from?
Hi, I'm Brett Estes. I'm the North Coast Regional Representative for the Department of Land, Conservation and Development.
Thank you, Brett. Gail.
Hi, I'm Gail Hendrickson. I'm the Community Development Director for Clatsop County, and I'm here today to make sure Jay behaves himself.
That's right. I know. They need that.
Still on probation.
I'm very much still double secret probation is what I'm on. So, all right. Then we're gonna start in here. To my left.
Robert St. Clair, City Canyon Beach.
I'm Jay Blake. I'm the planning manager for Clatsop County, formerly with the city of Warrenton.
Everyone, Trevor Wrights, North Coast Housing Solutions, a nonprofit.
Brandon Ogilvie, Cannon Beach City Councilor.
Tom Brownson, Astoria City Councilor.
Steve Wright, Seaside Mayor.
Paul Mitchell, Warrenton Commission.
Amy Baker, Executive Director, Clatsop Behavioral Healthcare. Leslie Ford, Housing Development Advisor for Columbia Pacific CCO.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Alyssa, can you start us off with a elevator speech about the status of the grant?
Sure, I'm happy to start off with that. And then if you would like me to transition into introducing our speakers, I can do that afterwards as well. Most of you know, because most of you have been participating in this task force for a while now, that last year we applied collectively as a group to the Department of Land Conservation and Development for a housing planning assistance grant, which we were successful in receiving. It is not an actual allocation of funding. It is an allocation of a consultant to help us accomplish a scope of work. And the update is that the consulting contract between DLCD and the consultant is finalized, which is what we were waiting for before we officially kicked off. So we'll have them probably at the next month meeting and future meetings to start touching base on the project. They will also be reaching out individually to each of the cities to talk about data input and output needs. And so those of you who are on city jurisdiction staff, you will probably be hearing from Steve Faust or his team or me or someone else soon about that. So that's the update. I think most of you understand and are already aware of what we're hoping to accomplish. Look at land, buildings, and infrastructure in the county to help us figure out where to go from here. Happy to answer any questions.
What's the name of the consultant?
The consultant is called 3J Consulting, and some of you may know 3J because you're working with them in your own cities, which is partly why we wanted to use them.
3J is working with the the city of Warrenton on some housing stuff as well. 3J's working with Seaside, so it should, hopefully we'll have some good synergy.
Exactly. We were impressed with their understanding of our area and their understanding of what each of the local jurisdictions is already dealing with in the realm of housing. So it was a great fit.
Okay. Go ahead and transition to introductions, if you would.
Happy to. So Jay mentioned at the beginning that the Housing Task Force was formed in, I think, 2022, basically to have a forum where local jurisdictions and community partners could work together to address the issues of housing. And over the years, one of the things we've been doing is sort of sharing best practices or ideas of things that people are working on. And so we'll talk about that with the code changes. But the other thing we've really been focused on is sort of learning more about how projects go from an idea to a project and how we're actually not only the barriers that we face, but the successes that we're starting to have and the progress that we're starting to make. And so while we have had many conversations about how to overcome barriers to housing, this month I'm really excited to talk about two projects that are moving forward in our county and in two different parts of the county with two different focuses, but similar approaches to success, working together with partners, coming up with creative approaches. And many of you may have heard some or all of these presentations in your own jurisdictions or venues, but it seemed like a great opportunity to kind of do the same thing that we have been doing at this group, which is learn from what's working as well as what we're struggling with. And I think both Amy and Leslie, with their respective projects, have a lot to teach us about how they've been able to move a good idea through the housing development process, and also who we're going to be able to serve, what kind of needs in the county we're trying to address here, and how that fits in, how housing fits into a larger context of our community's well-being. So I asked each of them to talk a little bit sort of about the projects that they're working on for housing and how they will help move forward in the community and just give us all a chance to hear how things are going. So I think, Amy, I asked you to go. No, actually, I can't remember who's going first. Jay, whoever's on the agenda first.
Leslie is.
Okay, Leslie is first. Many of you know Leslie from Columbia Pacific Coordinated Care Organization. And I will let her talk more about who she is, what she does, the amazing thing she does, and the specific project I asked her to talk about. Thanks for coming, Leslie. Sorry, I didn't. If I knew you were going to be there in person, I would have crutched over in the rain.
And are you gonna drive the slides, Alyssa?
I have slides.
Oh,
Is
you've
it-
got the slides,
is it
yeah.
This one?
Robert will drive your slides.
Let me get this up.
So I did tell Alyssa that I would talk about one project that we're involved in, but I can't resist the temptation to do a little PSA on all the projects we've done here in the community. And so there's a whole lot more than the Red Line, which is now named Hawkseye Apartments, to talk about. So I'm just not gonna do that briefly. And the initial part of the slide is a lot of stuff you already know, so I won't go very fast about it, but let's just go ahead and go to slide 1. So this is kind of how we conceptualize. So we're a healthcare company, right? We manage the Oregon Health Plan benefit for Tillamook, Columbia, and Clatsop. And so that's where we grew up from. But we've also known that without access to stable housing, it's really hard for someone to deal with any kind of improvement to their health status or an illness or whatever. If you don't have a place to get out from under the rain, you're pushing uphill. So, and it's not new in this region, which you also already know, that it's a long history. We are required, under our contract, to do a very broad brush, health improvement survey. This year, I think, and we do it every 5 years, and this year is, we've just done another one. And it's a kind of an unusual process. Instead of just saying, on a scale of 1 to 5 or check this box, we actually go out and solicit stories from the OHP members and other folk in the community. And we are working with a piece of, which I now realize is AI-driven software, which converts the stories into some quantitative data. So it's a whiz-bang kind of thing. Nonetheless, we've done this now twice. And each time housing came out in the top 3 priorities for the community. We probably collected stories from 1,500 people. I mean, it's a pretty big survey. And there are other venues where we take little temperatures here and there about what's most important to you. Housing is always, if not the top, in the top 3. So this is not a surprise to this group. So in 2020, Columbia Pacific decided to establish a regional housing impact fund. We funded it with earnings we had achieved by hitting all of our healthcare metrics. So in Oregon, if you do that, then you get essentially you get your withhold back. It's a sort of a bonus-like payment, and we take the monies that we earn that way and we reinvest them in the communities. Housing is one of the ways we've reinvested in the community. So we're a little bit more than 3 years old. I actually happen to be a behavioral health clinician by background. But I also had in my background a lot of affordable housing development because we used to do it for our clients. The organization that I ran for quite a while actually started doing affordable housing in 1985, our first HUD project. So anyway, all that to say, we have this fund. Next slide. This is something that you already know. Clatsop County is the highest. This is when I'm making the business case for this kind of work. And Clatsop County has the highest rate of homelessness, and I'm not even sure if that's totally current. It may be even higher now, but it hasn't gotten better, can I just say? Okay, to the next slide. So what we did when we set this all up, we went through a pretty thorough process. We interviewed electeds, county folk who are in charge of housing, members of folks who are service providers, all the kinds of people who would feel the brunt of the crisis, and would have some, in the moment feedback for us. And then we reviewed the county reports to review what kind of stock and services, if they existed, or if they were sufficient, or if they were insufficient. And from all of that information, we sort of boiled it down to focusing on stock, meaning bricks and sticks, houselessness services, which we've done a little less of, and housing supports. Next slide. And before I go into that, I will say, you might ask, why does a healthcare company invest millions of dollars in housing? And we touched on that. It's hard to get better if you're like sleeping out in the rain. But it's also true that the healthcare results are much better if you have secure housing. So one of the nationally quoted studies was actually done here in Oregon on the OHP population. And what they found was within 1 year, which when I first read it, it's like, wow, 1 year of people being in permanent supported housing, they reduced their ED, their emergency department visits, by 18%. They increased their primary care engagement, which is what we want to see because that's where preventative care happens, by 21%. And the savings on the bottom line to the medical spend was 12%. And 12% of a whole lot of money is actually real money. So there's a very good business case for all sorts of organizations to get into housing, but healthcare. And in fact, United Healthcare has put almost $1 billion into housing in the last few years. Kaiser's put in like $500 million. The big health insurers are paying attention to this for their outcomes, and also they get dinged if people get re-hospitalized too soon. And this is a way that they could really improve it is helping. So it's an expansion of the vested population that really wants to see this happen and is willing to put some money into it. So this is just a quick review of the projects we've funded in the last 3 years. I will say that it's spread across all 3 counties, but by far away, Clatsop County, we've invested the most. And for 2 reasons. One, Clatsop County has the highest risk. And number 2, so this gets a little bit detailed, but we, as part of our way of managing the work that we do, We develop risk share agreements with all of the major healthcare partners in each of the 3 counties. And they get a target, cost of care for the county. So in Clatsop County, Amy is one, Clatsop Behavioral Health, Eric from, CMH, and, Pam Cooper from Rob. And so we meet on a regular basis and we evaluate how the costs are trending. And in the last 3, maybe even 4 years, we've beat the target. And when we beat the target, then we share those savings with the risk share. And so they've had a tidy little, nest egg to invest as well. And for some strange reason in that group, there was advocacy to spend that money on affordable housing, and I don't know where that came from, but they did make the decision to really devote their earnings to housing. So that's another way that Clatsop County has had more investment in affordable housing than some of our other counties. And the most recent one is the Marine Drive project that CBH has put up, and Amy's gonna talk about that in a minute. So next slide. So that's the total piece. So it's also interesting to note that in addition to units, we also have a mechanism to support capacity building. So an example of that is for CCA, we funded a housing portfolio manager so they could really take care of the housing they were bringing on, and that they could have some infrastructure ready to deal with all of we didn't know the emergency order was coming out, right? We didn't know that a lot of other things, but we thought there would be a fair amount of activity in the housing world, and we wanted CCA to be prepared. So we funded a 2-year position, but assuming that at the end of 2 years, there would be enough generated from their portfolio to support it on an ongoing basis, and that's worked out. So to date, we've done a little bit over 5 million in investments. And that's both the regional risk share and the local ones. And we're pushing on 300 units that we've been a part of. Now, we don't build units from the ground up. We're usually an early in funder. So developers or owners will come to us and they'll have a gleam in their eye. And sometimes they really know what they're doing and sometimes they don't. And we will do what helps things start to move. So we'll put some money in for early evaluation for the environmentals, or sometimes for securing a lot that we're not sure, but we can back a contingency. One of the advantages of the RIF that I was really committed to early on was it would be more flexible. Like OHCS, if you don't get your application in right on the deadline, you're out for a year. And so we don't have deadlines, we have a rolling acceptance. When we get an application, our team comes together, they evaluate on an agreed upon set of criteria, and then we send a recommendation either to the risk share, the board of directors on approve or not. And so far, they've approved everything we brought to them, because we do a pretty good due diligence before we send it to the board. So that's a 30-second commercial on the regional fund. And then the next slide. Oh, I guess you have one. These are our focus populations, the folks with persistent and severe mental health issues, substance abuse issues, houseless adults, houseless families, elders, and transition age youth. So we pretty much anybody who's interested in affordable housing, we sort of built it so we had maximum flexibility.
And no workforce.
Well, that's new.
Yeah.
That was not one of the originals, so we'll get there, but yeah, that's this strange little project we have going on in Seaside right now. Okay, so that's the RIFs of current populations. Next slide. And here's our new project, which is completely different than everything else that I just talked about. So health plans during the pandemic, not so much provider systems, but health plans did pretty well because they create their budgets on predicted utilization. And in the pandemic, the utilization just dropped like a rock. So we did have some money that was planned for the medical spend, but was freed up. And so we have invested it in things like this project around the state. So, this is the, Red Lion, which I'm sure you all know about. And we, closed on that property in February. I think I first started talking to Ganesh, the former owner, about 2 years ago. And he said, yeah, he might be interested in dealing, and I said, I might be interested in buying. And so we went through a due diligence, and we went through quite a process of an expanded talk like I just gave to our board of directors, saying, this is why healthcare companies need to be in housing. And for some of them, it was like, what? But they've come along and they're now pretty strong advocates of housing, and I think we'll see more of that going forward. So this is the building. You know where it is, I betcha. And it's 49 units, 38, that's actually not accurate. 38 of them aren't double, but they're larger than your average hotel room. Some of them are like 600 plus square feet. So some of them will make very nice sized studios or even one bedrooms. And then 21 single, they're smaller. So we have two sort of stacks of the building. One stack is access through internal corridor. And then there's the mechanicals and where the pool used to be. God rest the pool, it's gone now. I've complained about that this whole, I want a pool in Seaside that I can just go play in. So the externally focused are the ones closest to the river. They're bigger. And so it almost looks like the building was built in 2 stages. I don't think we haven't found that to be true, but it looks like it and it works like it. So that led us to the decision to try a kind of it has been done before, but not very often, a mixed model. So, so we're gonna mix our folks with mental illness with the workforce housing. So you all know the rationale between current support housing for people with behavioral health disorders. It's life-saving, and it's good treatment, and it's cost effective. But the workforce piece, you've also been hearing a lot about people who try to hire candidates, and the candidates like try to find housing, can't do it, leave. In the workforce area of healthcare, that's as bad as it is anywhere. So we have, and Amy has story after story of opening up an offer to a candidate, having the candidate be all excited, and then call back 2 weeks later and said, I'm sorry, can't do it. And all the hospitals have that. We have everything from housekeeping to doctors refusing offers because they can't find a place to stay. And that's critical for us, that we're all about trying to beef up our workforce. There's vacancies in every aspect of our workforce. So this is a small run at it, but I'm hoping it'll bring, so one of the developers in the project we just finished in Tillamook said, we're not the biggest funder in their project at all, but we bring gravity. Because once a local entity, a healthcare entity puts money into a project, other bigger funders are more likely to fund. So we're hoping that happens with workforce. So we are busily planning, plotting the renovation. I'm looking at like doorknobs and please, really? Carpet types and.
God, just shoot me.
Glazing out of the windows. And do you have a induction cooktop, or do you build it into the, on and on, detail that I wasn't really actually prepared to be a part of. But it's kind of fun. So we are, we did have a little bit of a setback. I don't know if you all heard about this, but we had a pretty significant vandalism event. Right after Ganesh moved out and the building was vacant and right before construction started. And it was pretty significant damage, but you know, looked like that. So we're planning on opening, we hope, July 5th. So that's back about 3 weeks than what we thought it would be a couple months ago, but we're doing pretty well. We're a little bit under budget. We're pretty well on time. We're moving ahead. And I should mention that the permanent support housing units will be managed by Amy's team, and the services from CBH will be attached to those residents. Is there another slide?
We're on 9 of 13.
Oh, geez, okay. Hurry up. You can go ahead. Oh, so we already sort of talked about that. We are a HIPSA area, which means that if people in the healthcare world work in the healthcare field for long enough, they can get their student loans reduced or eliminated. So if we can pair some housing with the HIPSA, we start to look pretty attractive for attracting healthcare workers. Okay, next slide. So here, late spring of 2024. So that slipped a couple weeks. The second question really referred to, is this a residential treatment program, which came up with the conditional use? And we were there to say, no, it is not. It is independent housing. They will have supports, but they're living in their own apartment just like everybody else. And has this model been implemented before? Yes, but the Albertina Curves project is also fairly new. So we have engaged FOR, which is a research unit that's sponsored by Providence, to do an evaluation of how this works for the residents and how it works for the community. Some of you may have been interviewed by them already. And in a number of months, they'll come around and interview again. And is that it? Oh, okay, sure. And it won't look like that, pretty soon. And is that the last slide?
This is.
Oh, my contact information. So yeah, any questions? Also, not just questions, but if you run across somebody who's got a gleam in their eye about a housing project, and sometimes they're knowledgeable and sometimes they're not, send them to me. Because in those focus areas and for that population, we can often provide both technical assistance or support, financial support.
So I just have a quick question. You said that Clatsop County has the highest percentage of homeless in the state. How's that quantitative? Is it based upon population and percentage? I mean, how do you, compared to Portland, there's much bigger, more population, has to have a higher percentage of homeless?
It is per capita.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be able to see it in my head.
You don't have more numbers, but you have more percentages.
Percentages, it's quantitative, but,
Yeah.
okay.
Leslie, how does that, 5 million point something for the 300 units? Do you have a feeling like that 5 million went towards a large percentage of the funding of those units, or?
No, small, it's a small amount.
Okay.
It's a small percentage. Like I said earlier, it's often just first in money, which gives investors confidence. Although we also had a couple of situations where we had a project just going right along. And then they had a pretty precipitous gap, like when the interest rates went up. And we have stepped up again and filled that gap so that a project that was, on its way didn't falter. So we've done that a couple of times. We have a lot of flexibility, which is unusual and cherished, gotta say.
I might have missed this, but where does your funding come from? Where do you get this money?
So we get this money, so we're the Oregon Health Plan Management Organization. And in our contract, we are required to meet certain there's two ways. The biggest way for this fund has been where we're required to meet certain targets, like number of people, number of children vaccinated, or number of adolescents screened, or there's like, every year there's about 15 to 16 targets we have to hit. And each target is worth X amount of reward. And if we hit those targets, we get money back. And we've been really successful at hitting those targets. So we've gotten, every year, we've gotten somewhere $4 or $5 million. And the biggest investment of that money has been in housing. So the board decides to take that money, not just housing, but housing is most of it, takes that money and puts it in the regional housing fund. And then that's the money we draw from.
Hey, again, what's your region, Clatsop, Tillamook,
And Columbia.
Columbia?
And then I said there were two. The second one, which we don't expect to ever happen again, but it happened during the pandemic, where what we projected to be spending on medical services, we spent less. So we took that difference and we invested it into the community.
Okay. Alyssa, anything you want to add to that?
No, just that I think we're very fortunate to have this partner with these kind of resources and flexibility to help us close the resource gap in housing. And the fact that Leslie talked about the different kinds of projects they're supporting is very encouraging when as she said, when people get twinkles in their eye about how to do housing. This is just a very important partner, and I'm happy that we got to learn a little bit more about it. So that's all I have to say. And looking forward to hearing the next one, because Amy is also a very important partner who's doing great things.
Just real quickly, how long has this part of OHP been in existence? I mean, how long have you been doing business?
The CCOs?
Yeah.
The CCOs have been operating Columbia Pacific since 2012.
Well,
So it's not, so this housing fund is not a standard part of OHP. We just
Right.
did this on our own. And the regional housing fund has been active since 20.
It's 20, okay.
All right. Alyssa, you're up again.
I feel like I've introduced Amy 3 times, but please, let's have Amy Baker, the Executive Director of Clatsop Behavioral Health, talk about their role in housing and the particular project that they're working on.
Okay, and Alyssa, I sent you the PowerPoint. I don't know if you got it, because I just sent it on my phone, the PowerPoint that I did with the commissioners.
Oh, I never got that. I don't think that
You
showed
know,
up.
it's fine. I mean, it makes it more real when you can see the pictures, but you'll just have to
look.
yeah, look. So, so Clatsop Behavioral Healthcare, like, I mean, I think what's interesting about this presentation is that, because housing has become such a crisis, like for all of us, like across the spectrum in all sorts of ways, it has forced many of us into housing in ways that we didn't think we would before. And it's actually pretty unusual to have a rural community mental health program to run housing. Like usually the partnership has been to rely on the housing authority and community action and landlords and that type of thing. But given the severity of this situation, like it just became really clear to me early on in my position. I've been in my position for almost 8 years. Just shocking. Probably like 70 in dog years, but I think in 2019, I came to the conclusion that, oh, look at that. You guys are so good. Very good. You can just leave it there for right now.
Thanks, Alyssa.
In 2019, it became really clear to me, we are, your community mental health program does many things. We do many, many things. We span the whole population, kids to adults. We even do like babies and moms and elders, and we do crisis, and we have a residential program. We do all of these things. But but probably the core reason that we exist is to serve people who have serious mental health issues. So people who are born and developed a diagnosis of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or something to that effect. We were created in 1963 to like deinstitutionalize people and serve them in the community. And when you have a housing crunch, the first people to lose their housing are gonna be people who have serious mental health issues, because it's harder to function if you're living on a fixed income because of your disability check and the rents go up. I mean, it's the first population to lose their housing. And so in 2019, I was like, okay, we're gonna have to do housing. So, I feel like I flapped around in the bathtub is the best way I can describe it for the first couple of years, trying to figure out how to do it. And I kept talking to Leslie about it, and she's like, well, you gotta hire a housing person who's gonna help you do that. You have to start with that. And so I did. And we, over the course of like the last 4 years, like I couldn't figure out whether to start with the money or the site. And I'd go back and forth between the money or the site. And we even approached, we called him fondly the Blue House guy, who has a blue house next to our residential facility in Warrenton. And I was like, wouldn't that be great if we had housing right next to our residential facility? You know, there's sort of strength in numbers when you have staffing, like this will be great. And the Blue House guy was very nice, but he did not want to sell his house. So, so we started to get more serious when we found a developer. Like that was probably the biggest step for us. I didn't have any funding for this, right? There was no funding whatsoever, but you know, by God, I found a developer. And we pursued the Copeland Commons project, the building in Astoria. Decided not to go with that building because the architect at the time was worried that there was too much water damage to the building. And it was also gonna be really challenging to turn the first floor into office space for staff. It was hard to do like daylight in there, and parking was gonna be an issue, so. And then I probably don't need to go into the Heritage Square debacle just to.
There's shaking his head no, okay.
But I do want to give a lot of credit to that, because it really changed the dynamic for this project. And so I know Brett was on this call, for all the people who had to like suffer through how painful that was. I think this project is going through smoothly because of that.
I was really glad to see you continue to pursue what you wanted to do at Heritage Square and not let it go.
Yeah.
And the developers that you ended up with were the people that were working with Heritage Square, so.
Jill Sherman is good people. She's like, they're mission driven, like that's half of it, right? It's the mission driven element to it. And it was her realtor that found the parcel. And so obviously buildable land here is like, woof. I mean, you know, you look and look and look and look and look. And they found the parcel of land between the Motel 6, KFC, across from the Orange Smoke Shop. I was like, okay, good. People are not gonna complain too much about us moving into the neighborhood, right? Like, it's hard to get, you know, I'm not gonna decrease the value of the nearby properties.
Cigarettes and
Good.
chicken.
Yeah.
And we had,
That's a balanced meal.
I know.
Yes, all right.
we had about a 6 to 8 month hang up with the KFC owner, because the KFC owner had sold the property like 2 owners back, and basically said you couldn't put in anything that was in competition with their business or that they disapproved of. And I was like, no. So we had attorneys involved, and eventually the KFC guy came back and said, we're not gonna oppose your building. And I was like, good, because like, we're gonna probably quadruple your business think you should know is gonna be really good for you. Both employees and clients. So, and then are you working the slideshow, Alyssa? You don't have to.
Just say next slide and I'll do next slide.
And next slide after that. Go to I want to go to the funding stack.
Okay.
That's the backside of the building. It's so pretty. All right. So once we had the site picked out, like timing was really great in that, there was all this, pandemic funding flowing, the ARPA funding, lots of one-time only funding flowing, and you know, what else are you gonna spend one-time only money on? It's not gonna be staff. So we got 2 OHA grants, to the total of like almost $5 million, and that set us up to apply to OHCS. And then we were awarded OHCS funding, and that set us up to apply for the low-income housing tax credit, which we were also awarded. And the capper on all of it was Leslie's Columbia Pacific money, which is gonna allow us to build this building debt-free. We're gonna own it outright. We're gonna own it outright. I'm really happy about the model because I kind of watched how other organizations have done permanent supported housing. And it's a risk, right? When you house people who have challenges, it's a risk. I really wanted to combine it with our office on the first floor so that we would have, you know, not just a couple of on-site staff, but a whole cadre of on-site staff. So that things like, you know, people isolating in their rooms, not coming out to socialize, like all of those things, it makes it much easier for us to address that and get in front of it. So, so last night we went before the planning commission on 2 variances. Don't ask me what a step back variance is, because I will never understand that, no matter how many times it was explained to me. And the amount of window space coverage and the parking variance, which I understand the parking variance very well. But basically our staff, I mean, our clients, they typically don't own cars and they typically don't drive. They're more bike and bus riders. So I'm happy to say that our variances were approved and we're on to the next step, which is the historic design review. And then I think we go before the city commission in May.
Was there anybody, their planning commission that was there attending that were against what you're doing or testifying against parking or whatever?
There was one gentleman who owns a rental across the street and he was worried about residents parking in front of his rental.
Okay.
And, you know, I mean, again, like my experiences are clients typically don't drive. I told them I didn't think that would happen. And I also said, obviously we're not gonna support that because I don't want people crossing that busy road. That seems like colossally unsafe to me. And then he stopped me afterwards and he's like, well, you know, you're gonna block my view. And I know, but he's like, but I know we need the project. We desperately need the housing, so, okay. That was it.
Good.
Like my experience from Heritage Square, which was a much tougher site because of, you know, sort of the precious nature of like downtown Astoria. I feel like the community has shifted around, like largely and I've grown up and lived in this state my entire life, and I'm just gonna say Oregonians like hate growth. We just do. Like that's probably the biggest challenge that we face in like trying to figure out how to do the housing. Like, you know, I spent my whole life looking like, thank God we don't live in California. You see all that sprawl? Like this state was very intentional about not being California. And we don't like growth, and it's probably the biggest challenge, and especially in this area where we don't even have a lot of developable land to kind of get through that process. But to me, it felt like people, like it's so pervasive and it's so in your face that it's kind of like people are like, okay, we have to do something about housing. So I am grateful that we're at this site and not downtown Astoria, because I don't feel like our clients will be under a microscope. Like, I just think it's gonna be better for everybody.
I think the old house is a good example, you know, it went in and, you know, there were people that thought it would create a negative impact in
Yes,
the little Uniontown area.
yeah,
And it was nothing burger.
it was a nothing burger. And this will be a nothing burger too. Like,
Yeah.
it's like when people have housing, they go inside. Yeah, it's like, you know,
Much better.
yeah.
It's safer.
Huh?
It's safer.
It's safer.
It's healthier. It's all those
Yeah.
things that we want. Yeah.
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 So that's my presentation.
Any questions? Any questions from up top there? I think we've had a couple of successes here. It's nice to be able to talk about progress. And it seems like it's been 2 years of looking to find some progress, and to finally have them show up here today is a huge win, I think. And so that's a series of projects, and hopefully there'll be more that follow through that model as well. Alyssa, any follow-up from you on that?
Jay, I just want to agree with what you said, right? For those of you who are elected officials or planning commissioners who sit through the difficult conversations with the community about how to make housing happen, to see the progress that these guys have made and the obstacles that they've overcome and the outcomes that are starting to happen is really encouraging, and hopefully gives us more to build on as we keep trying to meet the different kinds of needs in the community. So Jay, you and I think are on the same page, which is, it's just nice to see some progress in the right direction, and really appreciate both of you guys for sharing with us how you have gotten to this point.
Thank you, Alyssa. Do you want to introduce the next speaker?
Well, since you are the next speaker, I know you don't want to introduce yourself. And I think you and I were joking, right? Jay would like you to give it up for Jay. But this is also a part of what we've been trying to do with the task force is really each of you guys in your different jurisdictions are taking a look at your codes in one way or another around how to facilitate housing or how to look at housing. Some of you are required by the state of Oregon. Some of you guys just know it's the right thing to do for your community. We at the county have been doing the same thing. And so what I'm hoping is that Jay will kick off a conversation that will actually lead to each of the cities also being able to talk about what you're looking at in terms of code changes for housing, and be able to share and learn from each other along the way. So Gail and Jay have been working on Clatsop County's rural residential housing changes, and I think that was a logical place for us to start, and hopefully opens up a larger dialogue about what we can do with our codes to make housing easier. So give it up for
Alyssa, your praise that you've just heaped on me is too much. I certainly appreciate it. And I'm here only because Gail is being a doctor, caregiver for significant in her life. And so I was the next logical choice. And Gail, if I mess up on anything, please wait till the end. Don't interrupt. Okay.
I'll just wait till you get back in the office tomorrow, Jay.
Yes, I look forward to that. All right. So Clatsop County manages the planning and development of areas outside of all the municipalities, outside of Cannon Beach, outside of Seaside, Deerheart, Warrenton, and obviously the city of Astoria as well. And sometimes that gets lost in the general public. We get a lot of calls. Oh, I live on Southwest 6th Street. What do I do with my house? And so we're constantly sending people to other areas. But Where our focus is on very much rural areas, and much like Amy talked about, the state's rules regarding planning are fairly strict, and there's a good basis for that, and a long history for that. But that does make for some challenges when we've got growth and we've got to contend with growth issues. Go ahead and hit the next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about this group and how Clatsop County is trying to foster some solutions. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's called WADA, Land and Water Development and Use Code, WADA. And we're going to talk about clear and objective standards. We lovingly refer to that as chaos. And just a couple of quick additional items. So go ahead, next. We're all familiar with the issues. We've got problems getting the housing built. Counties and cities generally are not the ones doing it. We're the regulators, so sometimes we're seen as the largest impediment to this. There are so many things in conjunction with rules and regulations that cause housing development to be. And Oregon doesn't necessarily want it, because if it were easy, it would be happening everywhere, all over the state, which is certainly something that we don't want to support. There are a lot of other factors. Land availability, we just talked a little bit about that. The cost and demand of the land in our area is significantly higher. We certainly know that. Availability and cost of construction materials. My wife and I were fortunate enough to finish building a house just as COVID started. 6 months later, our house would have been significantly more expensive. So the cost for building has increased dramatically. State building code requirements never get any easier. They never simplify. There's always additional levels of code requirements. System development charges, cities charge for fees to access the existing sewer and water system. Those things are necessary for municipalities to pay for services. But it does add to the cost of development. It's a balance issue that we have to deal with there. Inflation, local employment, salaries. We haven't been able to keep up salary-wise with the actual price of housing in our area. One of my least favorite things is NIMBYism, or not in my backyard. There's one that's also called NIMTO, not in my term of office. And that one is essentially the elected officials' version of, I don't want that happening. And litigation. We are a very LUBA-aware community. We are very familiar with the fact that if we don't like something, we have several options that we can carry things through, and there's always delays. Some of those aren't government related. And so sometimes we get the blame for things that may or may not be our fault. We are, actually, let me back up. The state has asked municipalities to make changes to development codes to make it easier for middle housing and housing development to occur. Part of a concerted effort across the state to reduce application fee costs, reducing the time it takes for approval, making the process simpler. It's something that cities are required to do. Warren is right smack dab in the middle of it. The county board was asked if they wanted to participate in this earlier last year, I believe it was, yeah. And the county board said, yes, we would like to make changes to our code to make it easier for people to develop on land that we're guiding for development. So at a staff level, we created 11 possible code amendments that we think might make the development of housing a little bit easier in rural parts of the county, while still balancing the urban-rural divide that we want to maintain. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each of these, but changing how we review duplexes from a type 2 to a type 1 use, making it easier for people to either build or convert houses into appropriately designed and constructed duplexes, making it easier. Next one. We have some zones in our zoning classification that have different restrictions because of historical development patterns. What we're trying to do is create uniformity so that the same request is the same process in one part of the county as it is in another part. And so that one will be an interesting one to see if that moves forward. Next one. Reducing some minimum lot sizes. And there's been a lot of discussion about this. In significant areas around our county, there are platted blocks of 5,000 square feet in the middle of nowhere. And we platted thinking that this was the next New York City. And those lots exist, they're out there. And so we're trying to figure out what a reasonable density is in some of these, what we'll call rural communities. Okay? So the possibility of reducing the minimum lot size to allow for the use of a few extra lots in these areas might be something that we would consider. Next one. Allowing triplex and fourplex development in certain areas, again, with some minimum lot size requirements. We don't have a lot of these areas where you could build these types of things. And is that going to solve the housing crisis? No, it's not. But would it go? Would it help? Would it create a few places? It might. And so that's why the county is taking a look at it. Next one. Changing, again, the review process for certain types of uses, multifamily dwellings, mobile home parks, rooming houses, etc. Right now require a conditional use with a $1,200 fee and somewhere between 6 to 9 months at a time. Reducing it to a type 1 use reduces the cost and certainly reduces the amount of time involved with those types of projects. Next one. Existing single-family homes in commercial districts. We have a lot of commercial districts that have a house in them. There's commercial use, but there's also a house. Those are legally existing non-conforming, and it's very, very difficult to expand them. We're looking at some changes in that area as well. Next one. Standalone multifamily dwellings, keep going. We're just going to keep going because there's a whole slew of these changes that we've got proposed. Keep going. Mixed use in commercial districts. Right now, it's a conditional use permit. If you have an apartment above and a commercial use below, that's a conditional use permit. And we would change that. And that's one of the ideas that's being floated right now. Next one. Changing the fee schedule, looking at reducing fees. One of the questions at our initial public meeting was, will we offset, or how will we offset loss in revenue? And the response that Gail provided, I thought was great, is in most cases, these things wouldn't go forward anyway, so this is additional revenue to the town. It's not a loss, it's just, you aren't necessarily going to get 1,200, but we're going to get 500. And so the idea is to try to streamline the process and then make it cost efficient. Next one. Next one. Oh, okay. So those items or ideas have been presented one time in a public meeting, kind of just a regular input general meeting. And the meeting was impacted to some extent by an ice storm one night, and then internet problems the next night. And we finally were successful in getting a meeting put together. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the public input process, but the input really came from one neighborhood. It didn't necessarily reflect the entire county. And so I'm a little concerned, and I've shared this with Gail, that we aren't hearing all of the stories, or at least more than one story. So we'll talk about that in just a second. The next one is chaos. I love the name. We are taking on, as a requirement, the streamlining of our process. And we are trying to remove areas that are intentionally gray, intentionally easy to create a lawsuit. Let's hit the next slide and I'll explain it. We're trying to eliminate what we call contradicting language, and we're trying to get language out of the code that is ambiguous wherever we can. And I'm going to give you an example. Preservation of landscape. The landscape shall be preserved in its natural state to the maximum extent possible by minimizing tree vegetation and soil removal. I don't know what that means. It might look different to you than it does to me. It's not something that's easy to document. To the greatest extent possible is throughout most zoning. And it is so gray and gives so much flexibility, which is something that cities and counties have liked in the past, but it also gives anyone an opportunity to appeal. I'm opposed because you're cutting down 6 trees. 4 trees would be okay,
6 is too many, but that's not what our code says. We're trying to eliminate as much as we can these types of, situations. It keeps going, it keeps going. Cut and fill construction methods are discouraged. Then you can't do them, we just don't do it. Roads and driveways should follow slope contours in a manner that prevents erosion and rapid discharging of rapid building. That is not a quantifiable or definable way. But it is anti-regulation. Kind of. You know, and trying to say, well, we need to do something that allow people to do it they want. So the government, that's what we want. It's completely subjective. It's like, and I'll be very honest, every planning director will interpret that language differently. Go ahead. I served 15 years on the Water and Planning Commission. We've seen that first one. I don't know how many times, the amount of time it wastes, because it's so ambivalent. It is confusing even to the commission, because each one of us will have a different opinion of what exactly they're trying to do. Yeah, exactly. Let's hit the next one. General standards. The proposed development plan shall meet the following general standards. Natural vegetation will be protected and retained wherever possible. To the extent possible, roads and driveways shall follow natural contours. Again, same sort of concept. Like, what does that truly mean, and who's judging whether or not that driveway is following that thing? And it's not clear. And so our goal is to eliminate those wherever we can. And those are just a couple of simple examples. We have other examples where we have type 1 reviews, type 2 reviews, type 2A reviews, type 2R reviews, type 3 reviews, and type 4 reviews. And so we're trying to streamline our review process so that it is easier to understand. Next. Okay. Last one. And this is not necessarily one that I want to spend a great deal of time on. The short-term rental issue is a hot button issue. And our community development department has put together some recommendations for short-term rental cap in the areas outside of municipalities. And that's going to be reviewed by the county board, I believe, in April. Tillamook County has just adopted one that creates a cap and by neighborhood. It's contentious. And it's really a difficult issue. And it's actually been determined to not be a land use issue. It's a housing issue. So it's a little different. It creates as much consternation as anything in our department. And short-term rentals have gotten a lot of blame. In my particular neighborhood, I'll speak in the neighborhood, the block I live in, there are 12 homes, 5 of which are people who live here year-round, 1 of which is a vacation rental, and 6 of which are second and third homes. So I'm not sure that blaming short-term rentals, this is an opinion, Gail, and I apologize if I'm out of order. It's an opinion in that I'm not sure that short-term rentals deserve all of the blame. Now, I live next to a short-term rental. They aren't necessarily funded. You know, it's a tough one. But the county is looking to address it. And the thing that gets forgotten in this discussion too is each city has its own rules and its own regulations related to short-term rentals. Surrey and Warrenton are much more conservative in terms of how they allow those than Seaside and Cannon Beach. And Gerhard can tell you. Well, yeah, on the planning commission. Okay, so these are discussions in that. Yeah, it's we're dealing with it on. And I agree completely with you. That will help me. Yeah, I think there's multiple prongs to the issue. The fact that we have a significant percentage of our homes that aren't being used to the extent that they could. And so debating this isn't going to solve that. So, but it is something that I know the county is aware of. But we're tackling all of these things right now for the next 12 months. And in fact, the chaos has to be completed by, I believe, July of 2025, including any potential. So we're on the fast track to get through our ordinance. Every month at the planning commission, we're presenting entire sections of the code and trying to simplify ways. Gail is leading the charge on that. And Gail, do you have any additional comments on chaos you want to add?
Not on chaos, Jay, but on the law doc amendments, I just wanted to clarify that it was not a staff-driven initiative. We didn't go to the board and say, oh, board, we have these great ideas. Would you like to do it? It was actually the other way around, with board directing staff to look at the code and see if there are any ways or opportunities where we could enhance the ability for a property to be developed residential. So I just wanted to clarify that. Otherwise, I think everything Jay said was pretty much spot on. So thank you, Jay.
Get a raise. No, there's no response. All right, yeah. Gail's absolutely right. I shouldn't have left that cloudy or unclear, but yeah, it was something the county board wanted to take on in addition to all of the other work that they're trying to do to support housing development. Hiring a housing manager and supporting grants to cities for infrastructure. All of those things are things that are hopefully going to help create housing production in our area in the next 5 years. And the other thing is, it's not going to happen overnight. These rules and changes are going to take a while to take effect, and then someone's going to have to apply. It's early in the process still. So, question?
So aside from the short-term rental,
Yeah.
is there any like future thinking about standardizing these processes across the county, including municipalities? And then, oh my God, would we ever expand it across the state? I mean, that would make development.
Concerning short-term rentals?
No, not leaving that out.
Yeah,
That's such a local.
So one of the things that the state does is the state gives guidelines for here's the parameters in which you can work. I use the analogy of the bumpers in the bowling alley. You know, you can bounce around in there. Here are your parameters. And it gives Tillamook County the opportunity to be Tillamook County. And so uniformity is nice. It's really hard because the politics, as much as we like to say codes aren't political, codes are political. They represent who lives there. And so that makes it difficult and challenging. I used to say the United States are better because we have Wyoming and New York. And I would argue Clatsop County is better because we have Gearhart and Astoria and Seaside and Elsie and all the pieces. But the uniformity is really tough because what is needed in Astoria isn't necessarily needed in Seaside.
And the state did that.
In what way?
So, well, they imposed on cities over 10,000, they imposed infill code changes, and we had to implement it, as did every other city.
Over
That's
10,000
in Oregon.
Yeah.
So
I can speak a little bit more to that if you'd like. Now the population has been, there's now code amendments that are required for cities over 2,500. So the population threshold was 10,000, and there is a milestone for for those 10,000 and up communities. But the legislature this prior year created new requirements for middle housing for cities of 2,500 and greater. And that's what Warrenton is going through right now, going through that code process update. And so there will be, as Jay said, I mean, there are ways to be able to have differences within cities, and there's not a statewide zoning code that says this is how every jurisdiction has to do things. However, the legislature does have some minimum standards for middle housing that apply for all cities over 2,500. And then there's some additional standards that apply for cities 10,000 and greater. And then there's another category for medium-sized cities, and I'm trying to remember the threshold. We don't have any medium-sized cities on the coast. But interestingly, there is Senate Bill 406 that was passed this last year that applies medium-sized city standards for all of Tillamook County, including Tillamook County itself. And so the code amendments that Astoria did, Tillamook is having to, and all of Tillamook County cities are having to achieve a higher standard in terms of middle housing requirements than is required for Astoria because of Senate Bill 406. This is what's happening right now in Tillamook County is all of the cities have grants that they're working through to start updating their code to be able to meet those medium city density requirements. And Tillamook County in its unincorporated areas is going to have to meet the same standards. So it's a test. I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see how this rolls out through Senate Bill 406.
Brett, if I'm not mistaken, Tillamook County kind of asked for it.
That's correct.
I don't mean in a negative way, that, you know, like they deserved it, but they actually lobbied for
Correct.
tougher
Yeah.
standards themselves, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was bills that were brought forward by Senator Weber and supported by Representative Javity.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But it's going to be interesting trying to apply. I mean, these are going to be cities of 1,000 people are going to be applying the same regulations as like the cities the size of Corvallis and Albany. And, you know, some of those, so they're going to have some higher density levels applied in those very small communities than what are being applied at a minimum threshold in Clatsop County.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? I just wanted to touch base on one additional item, and that is public participation. This particular group is one way that we're trying to reach out and kind of solicit input from cities, and usually there's a whole crowd of people here. And we're always trying to find new ways to hear the housing stories. And I kind of intimated in my discussion about some of the code changes we're talking about. When we went to have a very traditional public response meeting, discussion back and forth, we heard from one neighborhood. And that one neighborhood doesn't necessarily represent all of Clatsop County. Now, it does represent that neighborhood. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not trying to dissuade participation, but I'm trying to find ways that we can solicit more different stories. And in fact, Gail and I have a meeting tomorrow, if Gail's available. We'll see how her patient is doing. To meet with our communications people to talk about going out to interview people, very much like you talked about, to hear the stories of the ones who aren't going to normally show up at a normal public hearing. It's going to take some time and it's going to take some creativity, but we're trying to reach out to talk to a family in Jewel who lost their house. Or I would like to talk to a Hispanic family. I would like to talk to someone who works at Hampton Lumber and find out what do they do for housing. To hear the stories other than people that look an awful lot like me, and that's maybe not appropriate, but people like me always tend to have a lot of time and the ability to participate in public hearings. And those people who don't necessarily look like me, I know I'm good looking, I get that, but you know, the whole issue is I want everyone to have that same opportunity, or at least to have our elected officials hear those stories in addition to what they may be hearing all the time.
You know, we've plotted out quite a strategy to collect as many stories as we got and sort of identified places where we could, you know, capture people or invite people. And I can put you in touch with a gal who did all of that planning. And
I would love that.
where we went to ask people to participate.
Yeah. I would love that help. That guidance would help us streamline, so I'm not missing a target.
Yeah.
I think we would all be surprised like by how deep it goes and how much it affects people's average life, like just and my mom had to move in with me because she couldn't afford her housing anymore, like just. I've been moving from place to place to place, like, and it's the workforce, like it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a couple where the gentleman was like sleeping in our parking lot because they couldn't afford the gas for him to drive to the workplace the next day, like it has affected every aspect of our workforce lives,
Yeah.
I think.
To add to that, as a former teacher, middle school teacher, kids would come in on a Friday and say, well, I might not be here next week because we might have to move.
Yeah.
And they don't know where they're going, what schools they'll be at next week. And the stories are sad because they've started to connect or not. And then they get upheaval. And I talked to someone yesterday who rents a house in Warrenton. And she was telling me that, they're afraid to tell their landlord when something is broken.
Yeah.
Because she's worried that what will be the trigger for them to say, sorry, we're done.
Yeah.
And I know there are rights associated with renters and tenants and stuff, but this is not someone who you would expect to hear that story from.
No, I will tell you, somebody, when I'm not doing this, I'm a realtor.
Mhm.
And I happen to work out of a property management firm. I don't do property management.
Yeah.
But I know that that's a big concern, because nowadays, most property managers, renters, and landlords are not renting by the year anymore.
Yeah.
They're renting by the month.
Yeah.
So so every single month, are you renewing, are they changing?
Yeah.
Because COVID made a big change on both ways,
Mhm.
Yeah.
both to the person who rents, both to the person who doesn't. The other thing that is really affected is that you used to be able to buy a home in the $300,000, $350,000 range and be cheaper than you were to rent an apartment,
Yeah.
okay? And that apartment cost you $1,200 a month, and you could rent a house for $900.
Yeah.
We know those things have changed. One of the things, the biggest things that's changed is interest rates.
Yeah.
Interest rates on that house now takes them, even with special bond dollars that are out there for loans, are costing you, 6%.
Yeah.
With that now making you into the almost $2,000 a month, and it takes them out of the market. And people who work at CMH, for instance, who are at an income, who are, working in housekeeping or in the kitchen or even a CNA or a nursing assistant. I mean, all those people are making a living or a good wage, but can't afford to own a home.
Yeah.
And what I've been telling people is, let's ask the seller to buy down.
Mhm.
Because they say that 12 to 18 months, we should see a slip in interest rates and get back to some sort of normality, okay? And some people, I mean, my first house was 10%, but it was a lot different because you're only paying $50,000 for a house then. But the difference is if we had some way to be able to say, we will do a grant for you and we'll help you buy that interest rate for 1 year, which is about $5,000. So we're not talking about a giant sum. To buy that, or if an employer would want to do that for job retention, or, then you're looking at a way for someone to say, okay, now I can get into my house for 5%. And then hopefully in a year to 18 months,
The interest rates
will change, or I refinance.
Yeah.
But now I don't have to worry about my family of 6 fitting into an apartment with 2 bedrooms.
Yeah.
Now I can buy a home,
That's a story that I think gets told a lot, that type of story. And we've all run into that family.
Yeah.
And so my goal is to try to find a way to give that family a voice in our process. And give the county board another part of the story. They're clearly gonna hear certain parts of the story. And so that's one of the goals I'm hopeful that we can move forward. And I've talked with Alyssa and Gail and our communications people about that, and I will certainly wanna chat with you about that connection as well. Alyssa, any other words of wisdom you want to share?
Well, I just wanted to add that I think that the fact that we have this regional table that we're all sitting at right now, the fact that every single one of you guys practically went around the room and had a housing story from your own personal experience, it does show the benefit of this collaboration where we can actually learn from each other, right, Jay? The opportunity to learn from what Leslie already did around collecting real stories, I think will help us and everybody else's comments. And so I just appreciate the fact that we can all come together and that folks are willing to sort of bring their perspective to this table. So this is exactly what these kinds of meetings are for. So it was encouraging to hear the discussion. And other than that, I don't have any words of wisdom other than those of you who showed up. I really appreciate it because this was an excellent conversation. And I feel like I learned a lot about everything just from things I thought I already knew. I learned more. So hopefully you all did too.
All right, so anything else for the good of the order? We have reserved the room for next month, so share. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and knowledge and experience. That's just, it's great to see something moving forward. I love it.
Yes.
So, all right. I move we adjourn. Anybody opposed? Thank you.